Hello and welcome to the Play Creators Conference. I'm delighted to be joined by Shane Hartley, Art Director at Ravensburger North America, and Jake Breish, Graphic Designer at Ravensburger North America, as we delve into the art behind Ravensburger's smash hit Villainous series of games. So thank you guys for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So if we start naturally at the beginning, and in terms of your sort of beginnings in the industry, how you first started off in the world of board games, Shane, if we start with you, how did you get on this path to eventually becoming an art director at a great board game company?
It's funny. I always say that I fell into games, by lucky accident. So I was after art school. I went to art school out in Seattle, and at that point, the job industry wasn't that great. It was just after the .com kind of crash, and so a lot of people were in my field of work, at least in graphic design, were looking for work, and so I was looking all over the place. And this little company, there was I think my job recruiter at school mentioned this company, called WizKids. And I look into them, and their website was just, wizards and warlocks and, very D&D feel. And I was like, what is this? And I think I played one D&D game when I was like, I think I was like 10, with a cousin of mine and his older brother. And that was like about the only experience I had with the D&D or that type of experience. And I went and interviewed and had a great feeling and got the job, and started there as both a designer and concept artist at the time. And really just fell in love with the industry right away. Like, I wasn't a gamer in the classic sense of the terms. Of course, I hadn't played. I mean, I played, your monopolies and things like that, but I wasn't like a gamer for role-playing games or such. And but for me, I really dove into the worlds of those games. We were working with DC and Marvel, and we were doing collaborations with other brands like Buffy and and then also just general like IP creation, really coming up with those different worlds for the various games we were working on at the time. And that, for me, like, that was exciting. I really got into that, and really, diving into what makes those worlds tick, and making those fans tick as well. And I think that really is what started me off in my philosophy as a designer as well. And I was there for almost a little 6.5 years, maybe 7 years. And I eventually was directing the sculpting team, which we did traditional sculpts and digital sculpts near the end at the time, and then also the design team as well. And then after that, went on to go into children's books, a lot of licensed children's books, working with Disney, and once again, tons of really cool licenses. Got to start working in Star Wars, and I guess I did work in Star Wars at WizKids as well. And so some really cool stuff that I never thought, as it's like you're in high school and you're like seeing all this cool stuff, and you never think that you're going to be able to work on some of your the geekiest of cool properties, and I've gotten to do that. And after the publishing world, I went to Microsoft and worked on Halo. I worked on Forza, Gears of War, Fable. So my role there was I worked on all of the limited editions for the games. So creating the toys and all the extras that come with the special editions of them, and coming up with really the story behind those products. For me, it was really important. And I think this, like I said before, it goes into where I started, where I really get into the depth of a property and like what makes the fans really excited about about that, that IP. And when I did the limited editions, I didn't want to do limited editions that were just like, oh, here's a bottle opener with the Halo logo on it that you get with the game. It was like, how do I make this special edition part of the story? And so I worked really closely with each of those developers when we would develop those special editions to make them part of the story. And it wasn't just tchotchkes that were thrown in. They were very well thought out, and it wasn't, just a statue and you were just paying extra for stuff, right? Like we even tried to incorporate the special editions into the final versions of the games, where you would, with Gears of War, like I think the case that you get, the game case, actually appeared in one of the scenes of the games, like those types of things, right? And we made sure we used fiction and things within the written documents and such. And then I went into later on into consumer products for within the pop culture world. So developing for Star Trek and Elvis, and even dog products, which is actually super fun. It's just like another piece of that fandom, like where.
Were they Elvis Dog Products, or was that a separate?
Yes.
It was.
Yeah.
Elvis. Oh, wow, look at that.
Yeah, so Elvis Dog Products. I did Star Trek, like a Star Trek dog bed, Star Trek chew toys, the Elvis chew toys. I did a blue suede shoe, and like a water bowl that looked like a gold record, and it had the notes from I think it was Hound Dog, actually, was the music notes on it. We did some really.
You should probably can it there, Jake. I'm sorry, it's not going to get better than.
I give up.
But and then also working with Halo and stuff too. We did some really cool stuff, like that in there, and then being Puppy Cat and Bravest Warriors, and doing a lot of work with actually Valve on their Dota products. Which I did a ton of work with them on different various consumer products and clothing and merchandise there. And so, really, again, like those physical objects. And when I started at WizKids, I was definitely more that 2D, like, designer, your classic graphic designer, right? And then as I got through the industry, and they put me in the role of directing the sculpting team, I had never really had any sculpting experience. I didn't. The three-dimensional side was a whole new thing for me. So it scared me at first, but at the same time, like, I was excited. And it ended up being like what has shaped me into the art director I am, where I love the physical objects of it. And I think that's what also brought me back to the board game industry, is after doing the consumer products, and loving the world of, I always loved my the history of being at WizKids, and just the family aspect, and like the industry is very like close knit, and there's not a lot of drama. Everybody's like super cool about things. It's just a fun atmosphere, and so I always want to come back to it. And so some of my old coworkers that were working at Ravensburger, said, hey, there's a position that we'd love to have you start a new creative team here at Ravensburger. And that's where I ended up. And long story short, that's how I ended up back here. And I'm super excited to be back in the industry. I've been now, it'll be up almost 3 years here pretty soon with Ravensburger. But yeah, I feel like I've never left.
Brilliant. And Jake, I mean, I'm hoping there's a Frank Sinatra scratching pole for cats, or something similar kind of pop up. So
nothing quite that exciting.
How did you get started?
So similarly to Shane, I went to school here in Seattle for graphic design. Throughout my years, I was a 2-year program, and during that time, I had a friend reach out to me who was interested in making a little drinking game, and asked me to do the illustration for it. And it was an independent developer, and it was basically me and him making this game together. And since I was in graphic design school, I was, trying to flex my skills, and we put together our first game and kickstarted it. And from there, that kind of kickstarted my career in board games. From there, after graduating school, I was kind of contracting here and there. At one point, I got a contract at Forest Prizan, which was actually working very closely with Ravensburger at the time. So a lot of the games that I worked on there, I've continued to work on now that I'm at Ravensburger. So that was kind of a nice full circle there. But I did that contract with Forrest Pruzan and kind of bounced around doing illustration work here and there and graphic design as kind of a freelance designer. And about a year ago, a position opened up at Ravensburger for me to join the team. And I was actually doing jury duty the week that I was contacted. So the first week that I worked there, I was doing jury duty during the day and then coming home and then working and then kind of doing that. And that lasted a little longer than I wanted, but here I am. And
a little longer than we wanted to.
Yeah. But here I am. So I'm super stoked to be part of the team and working on all these great projects.
Amazing. Great stuff. And Shane, for a lot of people, either both in-house at companies or outside, the idea of an art director and that sort of team within a toy or a game company is an incredibly fascinating job. So for anyone that hasn't got that insider knowledge, what actually is the process in terms of when you guys are given the very first sort of start of an idea or they've got a finished game concept? What is the process for you in terms of where you step in?
Yeah, so I think at Ravensburger, at least in our office, we've tried to really really have the creative team be part of those initial, even just the inklings of a game, right? Of course, it's different when someone brings us a game, but when we're developing one in-house, we go through the process of we think about, okay, what are the licenses that we think would be a good addition to us? What are the trends that are currently going on? What are the what are the popular concepts, or where do we see like an opening in like a white space in the industry too? And then also the types of games, and then we dive into those. Once we've decided, okay, we're going to do Marvel or whatever, how do we where do we see that Marvel fits into our game profile? And then or like when we were working on Jungle Cruise, I went down to Disneyland and rode the Jungle Cruise multiple times to make sure that I knew every little bit about it. And we dive deep. Jake was working on that as well. We dove deep into the lore of the product and really trying to pull out those things that we could, one, put into a game, and two, from a creative perspective, what's going to get people excited on, right? But when we're working with the game developers too, there's that back and forth between us. It's not like it's not like a handoff. It's very much they come up with that structure and they're amazing. I'm not a game designer, so I will never say that I am. But we also, there's that back and forth. When we're thinking about, I think I remember when we were working on Jungle Cruise, the idea of originally, I think there was some type of a wage system with the guides on the boat, and Disney was like, well, they don't get paid in the original lore of it. They're not, and when they're doing the rides, they're not getting paid by the people riding the boat. So it's a little odd. And so we started thinking, well, what if we did some kind of a tip system or something like that? And so between the two of us, we were definitely going creatively, how do we create something that's really cool, and that goes, and so that goes into all of our stuff. And again, it's not just a license slap. It's not something we just we just take it and we just skin it with whatever license it is. We go into and we make sure that the game is appropriate for that license, that it really feels like it was made specifically for that game. And most of the time for us, it is made specifically for that game, but for that property. But I think as there are other companies in the industry that they definitely they take a license and they put it on top of something else, and it doesn't feel as true. And that's a key thing for us, is really making sure that when we're working with a license or a game theme, that it's true to that property or trend or item. And the process usually, going back to the process, we work on the game development team, goes and works with inventors, or they're working, either, or it's designed in-house. They usually provide us some of the initial structure of the game, kind of walk us through what those key points of the product. And then we kind of start noodling on, okay, if we're going down, I'm trying to think of like, in the case of like Disney, if we know that we're going down the route of it's going to be Cruella in the set, like, well, we know, okay, these are the key colors for her as a character. These are some key points that we need to look at from a creative standpoint. And then we go out and we look at artists that are that it will work with that theme. With Jungle Cruise, it was like, it was a vintage kind of retro-esque feel, but we wanted it also to feel modern at the same time, so it didn't look too old on the shelf, and so we went out and looked for artists that had kind of that retro aesthetic, but also were trending as far as like the newer kind of digital painting look. And we put together mood boards from there, and we show the internal teams, okay, this is the style we're looking for. And sometimes we give a couple different styles. We'll say, okay, we could either go down this route where it's all retro, or we can go down this route where we've made everything new, or like we usually have a couple different routes, and then we usually pick out of that. We have a few artists that we're thinking that will fit that style, and then internally we decide, okay, yeah, this is the right for the product. And then we dive deeper into that and say, okay, we pick, okay, this is the concept for the cover, and what we're thinking from where we work with marketing and the game development team to say, okay, they're like with Back to the Future, for example, throw that one in, really good example. It was really important for us to show that this game, our Back to the Future game, wasn't just one, like the first Back to the Future movie. It was crossing the full trilogy. And so on the front of the box, we have all three DeLoreans, not just one DeLorean as a focal image. And a lot of people were kind of like, oh, that's a lot, to put on the front of a box. But for us, it was really important to convey that this was the full trilogy and not just a single movie. And I think for the fans, that really comes across as well, because they're looking at it and they're going, oh, I see, see that that DeLorean, or I see the one from the, Old West, or whatever. And it's really, that's helped, I think, a lot, and it stands out on shelf because of that. And then the same thing with all the interior components as well, is diving into like, card design and things like that, what's true to that brand, and then we show the team, and it's like this back and forth process, right?
Amazing.
And then usually after we do those mood boards, we the game development team is still like, we're helping them, and they're creating their prototypes for testing and such, and that's helping us evolve on the design of the game. And then they hand us off, when they're done with their play testing, they hand us off the final text and all the different specifications for the game, and that's when we go into our full development, and then we go through the normal like proofing process, everybody looking at it, sending it to the licensor for review, getting approval from them, kind of doing that back and forth, and then we send it off to the factory.
Brilliant. And I think it's a testament as well to the work of you guys that, Back to the Future or the Villainous series or Horrified or Jungle Cruise, they all absolutely look true to the brand. And on that, Jake, I'm interested with obviously Villainous. There's lots of different Disney movies and Marvel characters and comics and movies that you're working with, and Jungle Cruise is an interesting example. That is a single theme park ride that you're and a movie coming out, obviously, but a theme park ride that you're zoning in on. So are you one of these people that, do you find that, here's one movie, or here's a character, or here's a theme park ride? Do you find those constraints that naturally come with that sort of work, do they help fuel your creativity, or do you find that sometimes it's tough?
I mean, I definitely think those, I guess you can call them constrictions, but I find it to be more of a fuel than a hindrance, because if you get, I mean, you open up a brand new art app, for example. This is really applicable to me and other digital artists. And the first time I tried to move to that digital space, there were so many options that, you kind of get overwhelmed, and you have no real guide to get you to the end, where when you do have those constraints, it does challenge you to think a little bit differently, but it also gives you, you know, the bones to work with, you know. And I think kind of to the point of your last question, part of the development with the creative team involved, it's, you know, I talk to the game developers about, you know, like, oh, what if we can make this piece do this? Or how are you going to be playing with this piece on the board with, you know, how do you interact with this piece? And a lot of that goes into kind of the thought of the design and how each piece looks, what's important on it, and kind of, you know, that, and I think a lot of cool ideas come from that too. You know, maybe a card flips rather than, you know, and it has two images on either side, and that kind of changes that item or something like that. But those are the kind of the things that, you know, really make a game immersive and unique, I think.
Absolutely. And Shane, with Villainous, as you mentioned, every villain and sort of baddie has their own distinct look and playing piece.
Yep.
And stuff like that. And you mentioned they're working with different artists for different characters and things like that. I'm interested, what is the reason behind using different artists for different characters? Why go down that route?
I mean, initially it's a two-part question, two-part answer, I should say. One is it helps in production time because then we can have, you know, because there's so many cards in the set, then it helps kind of split that up and we're able to help in that production time. But also it also gives a nice feel. So we usually pick an artist based on when we're looking, Jake and I will look through artist portfolios and such, and we'll be searching and we'll look for, okay, if we know that we're doing Maleficent, who's an artist that is really good with female, very strong female characters, and they're looking at their line work and making sure that it works with the original film as well, that it has that maybe some of those same aesthetics, and do we feel like that artist will bring that particular character life. And what's nice then is then that artist is able to carry that through all of the cards that are associated with that particular villain. So her whole set, you know, or that particular villain has a very consistent look across all of the associated cards. And then that, you know, we do that for each villain. And then in the case of Marvel now, you know, we have a separate artist for the combined Fate deck, and that allows us to have also a consistent look across those, you know, somewhat generic cards, because they can fight and they work within all of the villains, and so they have to have a consistent look as well. And that's really worked. You know, it's worked, you know, in our favor, because, you know, yes, it helps in production times, but it really, the fans notice it too, and they can see, okay, oh, we love this art from this particular villain, you know, and this artist really did a good job of bringing out the things that they loved about a film. And we also are trying to, the fans notice how we're able to kind of bring those like very flat, especially with the classic Disney films, you know, it's just a, you know, cell art type film animation. And so we're creating dimension out of those characters that people haven't seen before, and really bringing them to life to like, you know, it's definitely an older audience than what those were originally targeted at. And it's nice because you can have that nostalgia as a player, because you remember those characters from before, but the art has been definitely aged up to match the age of the players now.
Absolutely. And sort of, we mentioned there about some of the playing pieces and the movers, and they're incredible, and they've had loads of plaudits, and every one that comes out is so cool and looks great. And obviously, as a decision, there are plenty of games based on brands where you get, you know, your little cardboard beauty cut out of a character, you squish in, and there we go. And you've not gone in that direction at all. But the interesting thing with that I find fascinating is that they aren't just replicas of the characters. They aren't just, you know, they've not got eyes and a mouth and all that sort of stuff. They sort of somehow sum up that character in a way that I'm struggling to put into words. But I'm interested in that process behind those, because it's a very smart thing you're doing with those, and it can't be an easy process.
No, it's not. And, I have to give, definitely some props to Disney and Prospero Hall when they originally created the first version of the game and kind of set up the system. But, the way that we're continuing on now with our development is we very much look at them as, I call them totems, because they are like a totem pole in that they're telling the story of the character, without, um, physically actually drawing the character, where it's not an actual representation of that character. And with Disney it's really easy because, well, I would say easy, but it's easier to kind of somewhat do that because there's key points in their stories that are they're iconic, right, to that character. And then also their visual forms, because Disney does such a great job with making every one of their villains have like really unique proportions, or their collars are high, they have these big flowy hats, or their hair or shape. And with Ursula, just this amazing, the tentacles and just her attitude. Each one of them has that unique shape, and so it lends to the development of those pieces. And so we look at it, and Jake and I were talking about this yesterday because we're working on some new things for some stuff coming up. And for Disney, it's very much if you look at the core of the figure, there's always a topper piece, there's a body, and then a footer. So it's composed of three different sections essentially. And usually the topper is some type of a head. It could be a crown, it can be a hairpiece, it could be horns. The body is usually kind of the overall shape of a character that from the Disney world, so you can really get that come from afar. Oh, that's Maleficent. Oh, that's Captain Hook. And then the base is usually some type of footer or some type of element that creates a base for it to sit. It's very chess piece like. Because these need to be functional items in addition to being beautiful, that they are moved on it's like you're moving these on a regular basis in the game. It's not something that you sit off into the corner and then you don't look at it, you don't touch it again. And then even the case of like, if you look at Prince John, even though he looks like he's just a big diamond head, if you look at Prince John's actual face, his head, it has the shape of the diamond. And then the crown is on top, and then he has the footer piece of him is actually the neck piece, that detail that he has. So those are elements that we pull in, so that the general form you can easily, oh, this is Prince John, but there's little things that we throw in. With I think with Mother Gothel, we went through rounds and rounds of stuff with her, and what was the core element of her and how do we bring that across. And she was tough because she has very iconic hair, she has this cloak that she wears, this hooded cloak, and then the basket that she carries, but she doesn't really have a lot more than that. And so we were trying to like, okay, how do we do that? But the other part of her story is that she has the flower that's essentially that she's using to keep her young. And so we thought, oh, we need to really incorporate that flower. And so that's how it kind of came to be, that the flower ended up being that topper piece, and then the cloak of her, her kind of robes that she wears became the body that was really flowing. And so that's those are symbol ideas there. When we get into later, we'll probably show with Marvel, we go into a system where it's a little bit different because they don't have all those different interesting shapes, right? They're all somewhat humanoid to some extent. I mean, there are instances that are not, of course, but most of them are very humanoid. And so how do you bring that across as well? And so we couldn't follow the exact same methodology with Marvel. We had to look at it from, okay, what are the what's key parts of their costumes? Like a lot of them wear like a really iconic mask, or they have a headpiece or some kind of helm that's very, very important to them, or a weapon there's like a single weapon that they use if they're using a sword or a shield, or in the case of Thanos, his gauntlet. Those are very key things. And so we thought, well, why don't we focus on that, where we're focusing on that mask element or the weapon, and how do we encapsulate that character into that. And what's hard too is that with the Marvel universe, their stories are so varied depending on which comic series you're looking at. And that's an interesting thing too when we're thinking about Marvel. Marvel is that game is very much kind of like, it's kind of the middle ground between the what they call the MCU, which is the film universe, and then the comic universe, where we write a little bit more into the comic universe because more from a rights issue as well, because we're not directly rights, we don't have the rights for the film's content, but also because most of the new comic content is derived from what happens in the films, right, and they start to adapt towards that. And so we definitely pull more towards the comics, and what the fans are. There's some really great deep information for fans that may not know things outside of the film world. But in thinking about the sculpts, it's like, okay, what parts of those comic stories are really important to that character as well, that are strong enough that we can build into that sculpt. So it's a little bit different of a process because it's not so encapsulated. Disney has like, okay, this is their film, this is how they look, this is what they do. Whereas Marvel, it's a little harder because there's such a breadth of content and everybody knows a little bit different piece, and like, what do we bring forward, and the fact that they're, most of them are humanoid.
Yeah.
So
that's amazing.
It's a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, no, totally. And I mean, they are incredible. I can see, you could blow them up and stick a plank of wood on, and they'd be very expensive, amazing coffee tables, or
yeah,
shrink them down, put them silver in their jewelry. They're
we did 3D prints of the Marvel ones for Toy Fair this year, and just kind of did them in house. We with our 3D printer, and they were very expensive for a 3D printer, and we printed them. I don't know, I think it was like a couple feet tall, and then just kind of spray painted them into the various colors. So it wasn't like they weren't super, amazing as far as like something we could sell, but definitely for a display piece, they were really nice. But we've definitely been asked, to create those and develop those. I know Disney has asked us as well. Can we, is there an opening there to develop something that's more than just the game piece, and using the forms as something else. So
that's it, yeah. And I would never be as shameless to ask while we're recording about that, so I'll wait and ask what happened to those Toy Fair ones until we stop.
Well, I know one of them got given to someone at BGG, but I don't know where the other two ended up. Jake, did they end up in the office? Do you remember?
I know one of them got cracked in transportation, but I think they're both at the office.
Okay, so I think one got given to someone, and the other two there might be a damaged one, and then there's another one.
if I can do you a favor and get rid of the damaged one for you, if you need. And Jake, it's interesting on the in terms of the variety of characters that have been there with the expansions and things like that. I'm always pleased that I'm a big Emperor's New Groove fan.
Yeah,
we are out here, and it's interesting that there's such a mix of you've got your Lion Kings, and you've got what on paper might be the big heavy hitters, and the ones that maybe are the focus in terms of wider licensing. And then in a similar way to how you look at Funko Pop, and when certain properties do get the limelight and people are really pleased that they're there, you guys have that with some of your sets. So I'm interested in the fact you've got Pete from Steamboat Willie and Emperor's New Groove is in there. How is your process when you're working with sort of characters and bad guys that are almost a little bit cult? Because I imagine the fan bases for those fringe movies are probably just as passionate as the ones that are beloved by the masses type thing.
Sure. Yeah, I think we do. We have a strategy when we pick which villains that we're going to use. We usually try to pick a very popular, kind of very relevant villain, maybe from a newer film, as well as one that's more of a deep cut. So that would be like your Steamboat Willie, or you know, I don't know. But anyways, there's a, we pick one deep cut, one more relevant, and then we try to use the third to kind of fill in a gap if we need kind of that animal villain, or if we need another female villain in there. We usually like to use that as kind of our fill spot. But I too had my fingers crossed for Yzma from the very first Villainous game. I just, I love her, like the comedy in that movie. So, everybody's got a favorite villain, and we're hoping to kind of get to all of them. But I think, we do try to strategize from that point of view.
Great. And Shane, is there any I suppose pressure from do you see from fans, people saying, when are you going to do this character? When are you going to do? Has it become that much of a thing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are whole threads on, Reddit and BGG that they're, asking for, okay, this is my dream list of the next ones, or, and I think on BGG there's multiple threads as well, is like that people are creating their own sets based on their, and they're doing like fabulous jobs. Like some of these we look at and we're like, holy cow, these are, these are almost a full-fledged thing. Like they look professional. They've done the card backs. They've figured out the art. There's a few people that have 3D printed their own, sculpts that are true to the design and style that we're doing. So fans are very much involved. Early on, we had, I think we've taken it down just recently, but we had like an ongoing kind of a website you could go in and you could pick, like who is your next villain that you would like. And we definitely use that tally as a way to kind of gauge, okay, what's rising to the top, and how do we space that out, because we also don't want to like throw out all of the top ones right away. We want to definitely space that out strategically, so that that there is that kind of that dramatic pause, where you're waiting and you're like, oh, and Cruella is a perfect example of that. That was teased from the very first set, and we didn't, what was Jake, is it, she was fourth set?
Yes. Yeah.
Trying to remember, I've lost track. It's funny that it took us that long to get to that point, but and so people were like, where's Cruella, because she was definitely teased on the back of the rule book in the very first set. And right now, as of right now, I believe that they're saying that the Cruella set is our best selling set out of all the sets. So, which is surprising that we're 4 sets from the beginning, and it's selling better than the rest. So that's also telling of the property in general, like in the game, and how it's not on a downward. A lot of expansions of games, they sell like half as much as the original. They don't sell as much, and ours have kind of broken that trend. And if anything, they've also, because they are playable on their own, people can pick up any one of the sets and just start playing. And then what it does is it also rises up the sales of the other ones, because they go out and pick up the other ones in addition, which has been really great. And that strategy has worked really well for us. And people love mixing and matching, and being able to play, one from one set and play against another set. So.
Absolutely. And Shane, I'm interested in sort of your and the company's relationship with Disney, because obviously, they're known for having such great villains, and often, as with any story, sometimes the villain is the best bit and the most fun part of these movies. But they aren't, these aren't always the characters that get the spotlight when it comes to consumer products as much as the heroes and stuff like that. So I'm interested in, how has the relationship with Disney evolved over time, and how have they been to work with on this sort of project?
Yeah, I think originally, of course, I mean, the villains have always had like a love with those deep fans, and you can find, you go to Disneyland and you can get the various things, but it was very limited, like you said, in consumer products and properties and such. It was always about the heroes or whatever the characters were from that particular license, and then the villain was always secondary, right? And so to do something where we're featuring the villain and they become the main thing there, it is definitely something new for Disney, especially in a consumer product. But they've kudos to them. They have come full circle on that, and they're really supporting us, and they want to do more with it on it, and they really want to build that brand. And they've done it on their own too. As we've done more and more work with them, and as they're expanding their own consumer products space, the villains have become more of a focus for them as well. I mean, we did some early trend research last year, and it was very much apparent that it was good to be bad is kind of the scenario, where it was the villains across all the pop culture trends right now were trending upward. And so it was good to feel that, oh, we're on the first of that trend, and that it's helping us. I think Disney as well has noticed that, and has definitely followed its suit and helped us, build that brand more and more. So it's been really great. And they're super excited every time we work on something and what we present to them. And it's still a balancing act with any licensor. They're great to work with, and we have a great team there that really understands the product as well, and are fans of the product and play the product, and so they get excited too. But there is that balancing act of, okay, what are they focusing on as far as their own promotions? What are some things that they want us to wait on, or what are the things that are concerned, such things like that. So for example, with Cruella, there was at the time we were releasing Cruella, and the new movie was imminent, and so we had to there was a balancing act there of like making sure that consumers weren't confused that this was from the movie and things like that. Of course, that's changed now because of the situation we're in, and so all the films have been delayed. And I think they just announced, what is it, yesterday, that Mulan was delayed a year, or all the films have been delayed a year. And so, yeah, so I mean, it's a different thing, but yeah, it's definitely that balancing act. But Disney's an amazing partner, and we love the fact that they love our games as well, and that they actually, the team that we work with, they actually play the game, and they understand it, and that's key I think for that relationship, so that people, they understand that we're in the same respect that we don't like to throw a license on a game and just put it out and just it's not just a money play, but we like our licensors to be the same way, where they're looking at it from our point of view as like, we're trying to make this immersive game, so we want to have them understand our immersive that strategy as well. And I think if they're looking at it too far from the outside, they may look at some of the decisions we make, why we want to include a certain character in a game, and they'll go, well, that's not our focus. But if they really look into the strategy of the game and understand it from its core, they may go, oh, that's actually super cool. That's cool that you brought that out, that kind of thing. So
nice. No, great. And I mean, sticking with Disney, that there's a small part of their business, a little thing called Marvel, doing quite well.
Yeah.
And Marvel is the new Villainous game. There is a Villainous Marvel. It's the exciting new launch for this year. So we're lucky enough that Jake can sort of take us on a deep dive with Marvel, and we can actually check out some of the visuals and the process behind that. So yeah, Jake, if you're able to sort of get some of that up, and we can can dip into sort of what your process was like starting off with Marvel Villainous.
Sure. All right. Can everybody see the screen?
Yeah, perfect.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, so this is a little bit of our process going into Marvel Villainous, sorry. We did that all the time in the office, just find the two words. So usually it starts pretty messy. This is kind of what my unorganized files looks like when we're kind of developing ideas and going through just kind of this is basically brainstorming for some of the game elements that we use in the game. And this is a little bit more cleaned up so you guys can kind of actually see what's going on my page. So we'll develop these elements for the card backs, and just to kind of get an idea of, you know, what patterns, what shapes feel like a certain villain. And part of the card backs is reducing it to this sort of flat style design. So there's quite a bit of development that goes into the card backs and corners and all the little design elements on the card. This is a little bit about how we arrange those cards and how our strategy is when we are placing elements on the back of the cards. We usually have a focus on a helmet or a headpiece at the very top. Everything is aligned to the central line, and we go for this kind of rough hourglass shape of elements. So it kind of gives a nice feel, and it's consistent between villains. So this is a little bit of our preliminary kind of sketches for card backs, and kind of coming up with ideas, seeing what sticks and what works and what doesn't. And here are a bunch of corners that we come up with. Again, the strategy here is kind of just, you know, make a bunch of stuff and see what looks cool and what feels like it fits with the villain. And we go through, you know, a lot of iterations and a lot of meetings over these sort of very small elements that kind of end up everywhere in the game.
Yeah, I would say that, like, it's true that, yes, we're, you know, if you go back to that previous slide, like, it looks like we're building a lot of content and seeing what sticks, but at the same time, we're looking at those key elements of a character. And that's how we create those initial starts. We create those initial starts of a corner. You know, when we're thinking about with Hela, it was, you know, her headdress is, you know, her main element that's so important, right? And then she's got some different elements on her bodice of her costume also that are pretty iconic. And with Taskmaster, you know, he has this shield that's iconic, right? And he has swords, and he is kind of a weapons master. So what are those things? So we definitely think about every character and go, okay, what are those key elements of a character? What makes them different amongst themselves, and how can we, you know, what's the word, like, you know, bring that all the way down to a simplified corner element that one that won't be distracting from a gameplay and from the design of the cards, but it will be enough that you'll be able to tell, okay, this is the Killmonger card, or this is the Ultron's card. And I think just in general, like, if we think about the difference between what we did for what was done for Disney and what was done for Marvel, is we had to think about it slightly different as well, where Marvel is very much a kind of a combo of things, right? It's magic, it's superpowers, it's science and tech, right? And so we had to create these new borders for all of our cards and all the design of the cards. I mean, if you go to the next slide, Jake, if you look at how the actual borders are created, we tried to meld the science, the magic, the superpower, all those things into one, and making that look very true to the Marvel universe, but still also true to the Villainous brand as a whole, because we wanted it for that consistency for the fans that are playing Villainous and playing both Disney and Marvel, that it wasn't too big of a jump, but also be true to the Marvel brand.
Yeah, and I think there is especially with that slide, I think there's definitely a trend for, if you look at, you know, I know I never get them, but if you look at the Mondo posters, whenever they announce a new poster or things like that, there is a trend for these sort of very subtle, you know, people like, I looked at a Pulp Fiction poster that was very smart and very swish, and it wasn't just a big thing that said Pulp Fiction. It was very subtle, and it was for, you know, for proper fans and stuff like that. And in the same way, you can imagine, you know, even the back of that Ultron card being blown up as a poster for real fans.
We've been asked to do that too.
Yeah, there we go. I was disguising.
We haven't done it yet. I mean, they're definitely beautiful works of arts in themselves. Jake and and Chris, who also was part of this on our team, creating all of these and doing all the line art. It's definitely a labor of love.
And have you ever thought of this as just a random thing that's popped into my mind? But I've got like the Art of Mondo, and they do these big art books. Have you guys ever thought of doing the Art of Ravensburger and putting all this stuff into something that fans can buy?
Yeah, initially there was some talks within the marketing community within our teams to do like the Art of Villainous book to kind of walk through some of this process. I think there was definitely some it was like, what's the proper way to do that? There was a lot of conversation and trying to figure out, okay, how is this right? And what kind of format and how much content and such. And I think now, as we've got more content, and especially within Marvel, as we've taken that more on internally fully now, that we can probably do that. It's more of a possibility than I think it was earlier.
Great. The campaign starts now. That's it. We've got one signature.
Just start sending multiple emails to my marketing manager, and she'll love it.
leave it with me. That's it. So yeah, thanks, Jason. And moving on to this.
Yeah. Okay. So then this will be all the card backs in their final form. And like Shane said, we use a lot of inspiration from the villains, of course. So we look at the armor and the kind of shapes that they're for, in the case of Ultron, like his shoulders have like these cool little twisty like aperture sort of thing. So we look at all these cool elements that kind of make up the villain, and it's those small details that we like to try to fit in and make that villain feel really immersive.
With the fake cards too, like because that was mostly all the heroes, we felt like we could pull the arrow out of the Avengers logo, and that's a subtle little touch for that corner.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, the fake card was quite a challenge. That was one of the things that have changed, and players will notice between Disney Villainous and Marvel Villainous, is this idea of a shared fate deck, which brought up some challenges, because in the original, all the villains card backs and their fate card backs match, but in this case, all the fate cards had to match. But we also still needed to be able to have villain-specific cards. So we had to create new icons for the fronts of the cards, so players can then pull them back out of the common fate deck. And we also have this new card type called events. And the events needed to be visually different when you pulled them. So when a player pulled them, it was very obvious that like, oh, we're going into this kind of global event that all players are going to have to respond to. So we changed the orientation of the card to be sideways, which then we had to figure out our new art dimension, and we went through some iterations on what this card would look like. But at the end of the day, I'm really happy with how this turned out, and I think it has a really cool feel when you put it down on the board. And then more of those little design elements that we changed, things like the defense icon. It was a little more fantastical for Disney to kind of fit in with their storybook theme. But like Shane said earlier, we have this kind of sci-fi magic world that we're in here. So we try to take that into account when coming up with these different icons.
Cool.
And then here we get a little bit into the actual art of each card. Usually we lean towards the comic universe, as Shane said earlier, but there are some instances where we need to take some inspiration from the film if there's not quite enough to go off of from the comic books. So here you'll see some screenshots from the Black Panther film for the image of Killmonger. And here we have just the sketch phase, some red lines that we had some comments to, kind of liven up the flowers so they glow a little bit better. And that's the final here and how it looks in the card, at, as the players will see in the game. And then here's another one. And this one's obviously a little more comic-based reference here. And our artists are great, and they'll come up with a great composition. And every once in a while, we'll have some things where Marvel will come back and say, the street clothes aren't quite as thematic as we like, so maybe try to put them in some like armor or something a little more on theme with that villain.
And on that, Jake, in terms of when you're looking at these, because obviously Shane mentioned it earlier, but especially the Marvel comics, you've got certain characters have been around for a long time and they've been given different treatments by different artists, and they look slightly different in certain comics versus other comics. So how, I mean, in this previous slide we saw what looked like, a very, I don't know how recent that one was, but looked like quite an old school, quite a bright Marvel comic frame there. How did you go about choosing sort of which part of the comic history of some of these characters you dipped into for this?
Yeah, so usually we will kind of agree with the licensor on what kind of costume the villain is wearing and what they think is kind of the most current. And it's kind of that split between the MCU and the comic book universe. But once we kind of decide on that character's costume, we stick with that, and we just try to apply it to the reference photos and just whatever various application we need to. But usually,
I think the other part of it, the other part of it too is when the game development team, when they're developing the character and their card set, Villainous works based very much on a storyline, right? They're trying to reach their objective, and so there's a cadence of events that have to happen in order to reach that objective. And the same thing is, when they're with that villain and the characters that are involved that we pull in from their storylines are very much attached to that cadence of their objective. And so the game design team is definitely very involved in like, okay, well, which parts do we pull out, and what comic book story is going to be the most applicable? Or sometimes they have to, because there's so many storylines, they're looking at it from the outside looking in. What do fans think that their main storyline is? Like, all villains, of course, they want to take over the world, but like, what is the key element of that particular villain that they actually really want to do? And then kind of somewhat mixing and matching a little bit of the design of their storylines, because it's not as clear cut as Disney. And then Marvel has also created what they, to help in this, they've created what they call their evergreen looks for the different characters. And so that also is a starting point for us as well. There are instances where they don't have those developed, and so we're having to work with them to kind of to create that, because maybe they don't want to go down the route of what's in the comic books, or they haven't updated it to be in line with some of the current trend and or the MCU, and so they lean towards us to kind of bridge that gap. Cool. And I think another point too, and I think Jake, you mentioned it before, like, and I think when you go into this, you can talk about how the difference about creating the art for Disney and Marvel.
Yeah, so here I just have some different images from each deck that kind of show the sketch and then the final image. And to Shane's point, it is quite a bit different between Marvel and Disney. Because for Disney, you'll notice that most of the cards are basically direct screenshots from the movies. You'll be familiar with the scene. They'll be tweaked and changed a little bit here and there to help with composition, or if we're trying to focus on a certain item. But for Marvel, there's not a specific movie that we're pulling from. There's not a specific comic book we're pulling from. So a lot of these images are composed by our artist. We will give them, you know, the card description and what we kind of want it to look like with some reference images. But it's really left up to them to kind of come up with the composition and provide some sketches that, you know, we like. And once we kind of vet those internally, we have them continue on to colors. And we slowly move through that process. Every once in a while, we'll run into something where we might want to change a costume here or there, or we might need to adjust the colors. But overall, I think our artists are really strong, and you know, it's always a very exciting time when we start to see final art come in and we start placing those in cards. It really gives the game some weight, and it starts to feel like an actual product that you'll be buying on the store soon. So I know it's a lot of our favorite times is when, you know, the art starts going in and we start printing those prototypes, and it really starts to feel like a finished game.
Yeah, and they look absolutely incredible. It's yeah, superb.
Yeah, and you'll notice the style kind of varies between each one, and that's like we said earlier. We do kind of curate our artists and find artists that, like, oh, you're really good at drawing machinery, so we'll have you draw Ultron, you know. So there are kind of those considerations. And then this here is kind of back to movers, which we spoke a little bit about earlier. And I don't know, Shane, do you have anything you want to say about
Yeah, you can jump in
mover?
and describe the process on this.
Yeah, so for movers, movers are pretty like we said, they're kind of that simplified representation of the villain. And we start from a very basic sort of geometric shape of the character, and try to build something, you know, that has a nice silhouette, and will feel nice when you play with it. We go for this kind of, like Shane said earlier, kind of like a chess piece feeling, because I think the part of the immersiveness is that you're the villain, so you're not moving the villain on the realms, you're kind of moving this object that represents the villain. So it's not the direct one-to-one translation of the villain itself. But as you can see down in this left-hand corner here, there's some elements that we're using, and using examples from previous movers to influence kind of our treatments of this mover. And we eventually end up with some renders, and you know, we 3D print it out and pick colors for it, and we eventually end up with quite a nice lineup of movers.
Amazing.
And then
there we go. Yeah, look at those.
Yeah, the next slide of this is existing Disney movers. We do kind of take this into account, especially when we're adapting, you know, Marvel Villainous to Disney Villainous. And you'll see kind of what I'm talking about earlier about the chess piece sort of feel that each of them have. And this is kind of taken into consideration because we want players who play Disney Villainous to pick up Marvel Villainous, and, you know, also feel like, you know, this is at least similar enough that they're not picking up a brand new game.
Yeah. And there's a great quiz round for people. If people are still doing Zoom quizzes, guess the Disney movies and the Marvel characters. Just
yeah.
Yeah, and I think going back on that, Jake, it also the color choice.
Yeah, so color choices are also a pretty pivotal point, and takes some time to figure out what each villain is going to be. It's a little easier right now for Marvel because there's fewer colors, but as we get deeper into expansions, obviously you end up with kind of repeated colors throughout different villains. But we always try to vary them a little bit, and we try to find kind of the essence of each character and what color kind of represents them the best. So here you'll notice Taskmaster's blue, which matches a lot of his armor, and Ultron's silver. Obviously, he's metal. Hela's got her kind of signature teal green. Thanos is, his gold armor, and then Killmonger has this kind of earthy, natural rock feel that comes from like Wakanda and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, and also pulling the colors from the mask from that as well.
Right. Yep. His mask there. Yeah, and then for more plastic development, we have the Vault, which we take inspiration from different parts of the Marvel universe and kind of come up with something that we think would hold power, which is kind of it's a hard concept to really nail down, because like, what is power and how do you hold it, and all these questions kind of come up. So we try to find these significant objects in the universe that could kind of represent what these villains are pulling power from. Some of those things like the Tesseract cube, or it's inspired by the armor from Thanos and Iron Man, and then something that's maybe a little more magic inspired. So you can see here's kind of the three realms of the Marvel universe. We have the magic and the sci-fi, and then the cool high-tech armor and all that stuff. So from there, then we get renders. These are vac form pieces, so there are some things we have to take into consideration when creating that, like undercuts here you'll see highlighted in red. And after a few iterations and deciding what color we want to do it, we end up with the final product of the Vault, which holds all the power. That's always a pretty fun process of picking colors and going from sketch to finally having a plastic piece is nice.
Yeah, and I think on the final iteration of that, one of the decision points there was, I think originally we thought about it being like a bronze, metal type color. And then we thought, why don't we bring back kind of the Tesseract clear, transparent feel into this piece to give it, a mix of both worlds. And so that's why we ended up with that really cool transparent, so it really felt like you were pulling power from something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the last, well, I wouldn't say the last, but one of the major components that we work on and kind of the final touch is the packaging. And we knew Thanos was going to be the cover villain for this game, so it was kind of working through what sort of pose is iconic for that villain, what makes his features read really well. So some of these you can see, it's Thanos, but if he didn't have his glove on, you might not be able to tell it was Thanos. So we try different options and find out what we think works best from a silhouette standpoint. These darker areas are what we kind of planned on using spot gloss for, which are those kind of shiny pieces that you'll see on the packaging. Shane, did you have something?
Here a good point to bring out as well is that with Disney, the silhouette feature for each cover of the games was a strategic point of that it was meant to look like the villain essentially is like walking by and casting a shadow on the box, that very kind of ominous, like, scary, the shadow of the villain walking in to a scene, and all you see is that shadow as it creeps in, right? And So that's been that storyline for Disney. With Marvel, we had to think about it slightly different because, as Jake pointed out, they're all somewhat humanoid characters and features. And so how do we, how do we still from afar, if somebody's walking into a store and seeing it on shelf, that they immediately go, oh, that's Thanos, and or, oh, that's, the next villain, that we end up doing, or, anybody from the universe, and being able to think of it, we have to think about it, for the future sets as well, so we can keep that consistency. And so we made the decision that we would highlight, with the difference between Disney and Marvel, was we would highlight again those key elements of a character that really that are iconic, and the shape of Thanos's helmet and his gauntlet were where we really thought, if we made those more of a primary and brought those forward as a key element, that then it would define that character. And yes, it's a somewhat of a departure from that casting of a Shadow, but it still keeps the consistency of Villainous and that ominous feel of a character without actually straight up drawing the character.
Nice.
Yep. And once we kind of lock in on what we think that character should be and what he should look like, we then can move on to kind of color iterations of the boxes. And like the movers, we try to take the villain's colors into consideration. Obviously, Thanos is purple and he has his bright gold armor. So these were kind of our two main options for covers. And from here, obviously, if you've seen the box already, you know which one we chose. And it was this. There's usually a few more rounds of tweaking and just getting, everything just perfect, making sure the helmet looks like it's in the correct perspective and everything's
how thick his neck
sized
is,
correctly. All those little details that make a silhouette look a little weird if you're standing a little further away.
I think I adjusted the width of those arms, like how far his arms were. I don't know how many times.
And the size of his helmet and
yeah,
all that kind of stuff. So it's funny how it looks different between silhouette and an actual image. So you guys kind of have to pull those visual tricks to make it read still.
And I suppose the Marvel fans, if there's a fan base that's going to notice if you've got his arm size slightly wrong, there will be someone who clocks it, I suppose.
Yep. Yeah, we'll see that online.
Absolutely.
And then the last part is our, of course, great product photos. So that's about what wraps up making Marvel Villainous.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for that sort of deep dive into the process. That's really cool. And I suppose before I let you go, I know you probably can't say much about the immediate future or who's up next or anything like that. But suffice to say, there will be more. This is a brand that will live for a while yet.
Yeah, definitely. I think we have both Disney and Marvel. We have lots of plans for the future and how they can move forward. And as I said before, we've had to, in developing Marvel, the first one, we definitely developed from the get-go as, okay, how does this work 6 sets down the road? It's not a one and done, and then we go, how do we make this another game? We pre-plan for that so that it does work together, because this is a different type of game where it has to work. Say 3 sets down the road, those villains have to be able to work with the first villains, and so it has a similar nature to like a true trading card game, where it's somewhat of a living game where if you add if you try to play an expansion from 6 sets down from the original core expansion, how do those interact? And so we have to do the same thing for this. And the game design team are they're really great about, you know, trying to figure out every single combination. We were just talking yesterday about a new one of the ones we're working on currently for Disney, and we realized that a new game mechanic was essentially going to, you know, I wouldn't say break some of the original ones, but it was going to definitely affect how they were played, and we were worried about how those fans would feel, because it's such a different it's a new thing, but it was also it's that balancing act between how do we be true to that villain but also be true to what works with the game. And there's very much like, we do that from a creative side, on the game development side. I think, you know, the solution, we had to come up with a solution that we felt like kind of had the best of both worlds, because it wasn't a clear-cut answer.
Wow.
But I think those are things that we have to do, you know? So
yeah. And well done on getting through that without accidentally saying the name of the villain either. I was on the edge of my seat thinking it's gonna come out, and it didn't. So well done.
And if it did, I would have had you cut
that out. More work for me. Well, no, Jake, thank you so much for sharing your insights and stuff like that.
Yeah, of course.
It's and Shane as well. It's, you know, the world of Elvis Dog Toys is lost. Is definitely
yeah. If I only have one copy of I don't even know if it was sitting around here. I used to have it was an Elvis, it looked like a microphone, like a singing, you know, like a microphone, but it was a poop bag dispenser.
Wow.
Yeah, he pulled the
there we go. I'm getting a dog soon, and I'll be all over that. So yeah, and who knows, if there's an Elvis board game in the pipeline for Ravensburger, you'll be able to bring some of that back.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have to see if there's a big market for that, you know. I'll travel around Graceland.
I'll buy one, a big Elvis. So yeah, thank you so much, guys. That's been brilliant, and like we said, Villainous is a great game, and it looks as good as it plays, and yeah, long may it continue as a great board game property. So huge thanks again, and I hope people at home enjoyed watching it as well.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.